We are going to live stream. We have 3 channels on YouTube, one for original audio, one in Portuguese, and one in English. And today, so the live streaming will be with translation into Portuguese. Now I would like to give the floor to Sol, our chairperson, who's going to make all the introductions, and then we will continue. So the floor is all yours. I got the okay. Professor Dora Kaufman is on screen. So let's do it. Good morning to everyone, and may we have a nice conference. Good morning, everyone. You're almost welcome. This is the day 2 of our international conference or intelligence technologies. As she said, this is our second issue. So most welcome to TechnoWin 2023, which is a venue for multidisciplinary dialogue between students, professionals, researchers, not just from Brazil, but also from Canada. And the idea is for us to talk a little bit about the challenges and future scenario considering the advances in technology. For this panel, which is called The History of Internet and the Evolution of AI, so we'll talk about the early days of the internet, its emergence, access to data, which drove the development of artificial intelligence. And the question now is, which are the next steps? And this is what our guest speakers will be talking about. So I am going to give the floor to our moderator, Professor Dora Kaufman, who teaches in digital design and intelligence technologies of the PUC-SP School of Exact Sciences and Technologies. She has a postdoc in Rio de Janeiro and TIT in the PUC in São Paulo. She has authored many books. She writes in epochal businesses. And she's really an expert. Professor Kaufman, the floor is yours. You're most welcome. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure, and it's going to be a challenge to chair this panel because there are actually 2 very wide-ranging themes: the evolution or history of the internet and the advance of artificial intelligence. And I believe that considering the competence of panelists, we will be able to find some commonalities between all the themes. Number 1, I am going to introduce very briefly Claudio Pinhanes. I am very much in favor of very short curricular or resumes. He is a researcher at IBM Research and has been so since 1999. He is a leader in conversational intelligence technology lab in Brazil. He's vice director of the Center for Artificial Intelligence of the University of São Paulo, a partnership between IBM and FAPESP. Is for C4AI, and the other very renowned guest speaker is Professor Gemi Getchko. He has a very significant long history in the development of the internet, creation and development of the internet in Brazil. He played a key role in that. Today, he is the chairman or director of NIC-BR, and he is a board member of CGI-BR, the Brazil Internet Management Committee, and he has a very, very extensive resume with very significant contributions for internet in Brazil and the entire process of evolution of digital technologies in Brazil. Our third speaker is Mr. Sumo Mukherjee. I'm sorry, I apologize. I don't really know how to pronounce your name. How can we pronounce your name, Professor? Can you enlighten us?
It's Shomo. Shomo. Yeah.
Shomo.
What about your last name?
You got it right the first time.
Your last name? How should we pronounce your last name?
Mukherjee is fine, but Shomo is you can just call me Shomo.
Ok, Shomo. Então, professor Shomo, e tem uma...
So, Professor Shomo, with a long career, focusing on mathematics and physics, specializing in chaos, fractals, and dynamics. He has also worked in many different universities, Toronto, McGill, and many others. He's been studying themes related to the environment and also aspects related to artificial intelligence. So, our first speaker, please, Professor Demi Getchko, you may, the floor is yours. And the idea is for each one of the panelists, and we'll have 15 minutes for a formal presentation. And then we have some time for questions and answers, maybe just one question, because we have 1 hour overall for our entire panel. Professor Getchko, floor is yours. Thank you so much, Dora, and everyone else. I have prepared a few slides. I'm going to skip many of them, and then afterwards they will be available for anyone who wants to have access. I'm going to talk about some more general stuff. First, I'll talk about a timeline to demystify a few things that are said. Number one, the internet started in an advanced research lab called ARPANET. So sometimes it was called ARPA, DARPA, with a D for defense in the beginning. And this research laboratory of the physics department of the Army in the US was a project called ARPANET, and then afterwards it was called Internet. And the first thing I would like to say is that there is a history that ARPANET was made for military purposes because it was the time of Sputnik. And you wanted to fight the Russians. So many of these pioneers are still alive, and I know very well some of them. Crocker, and some others are deceased, but this was not really the idea. Well, certainly the ARPANET emerged with military money, just as GPS and many other projects from the US military. But people involved in the ARPANET were academics from the time. And if you take a look at the first slide, and you can see that the first exchange of packages in ARPANET was in 1969, and no one is old enough to know this, but 69, there was Woodstock in the US that was back in 1969. So everyone involved in this were people who were finishing their bachelor's, their baccalaureate, and they were going to masters. They were immersed in a counterculture of that time, and the principles that drove the creation of ARPANET. It was a network without a control center, with a failure point. It cannot be disconnected. It was something less subject to rigid hierarchies and more subject to the voluntary joining of those who were leading that. So the first date for the beginning of the ARPANET, when the first packages were exchanged, was in October 1969. There's a picture showing that. And after that, it gradually spread. And what happened is that the original software for package exchange, and ARPANET was a package exchange system, and it was changed. And then Steve Cropper and Robert Gann invented the first TCP/IP, and this internet protocol. So it's a protocol to connect networks. So ARPANET is a network of networks. It's not just a single network. It's a collection of patches that are interconnected, and this is very much connected to the spinal tissue with a glue called Internet Protocol. It's the glue between networks. So Internet Protocol is a protocol used so that networks can talk between themselves, so that we have this final patchwork quote, so to speak. So the network started using the name protocol, and we call it Internet because of the Internet Protocol, which is the glue that binds together this mosaic of many different patches or pieces. In Brazil, we registered the BR in 1989. And there's something else that I would like to say, that sometimes we confuse this with things like web. Web is 91 and 92, and the web provided the main flow of individuals in the network. In the web, all the individuals were participating in the process, and then it has a different look. It's a network of academics, and now it was just a network of individuals. This became very clear in Brazil after 1993-94, when the DBS original providers, Mandek and others, started providing internet services for DBS members. And this led to the need of creating a committee that was started in 1995 that somehow allowed developing good practices for that. And this is the Internet Management Committee in Brazil. Some other comments. It's important for the internet to be multi-stakeholder, meaning the internet is neither an initiative of governments or private or academics or the third sector. And this was very clear when the original CG was built, that has components of all these sectors that are represented. It's not like Anatel, which is the Brazilian agency of telecommunications. It's a committee that designs good practices for the use of the internet. And this provided a great image for Brazil internationally, because ICANN was created to manage names on the internet, and it's multi-stakeholder, but CGI is before that, and it had already implemented the multi-stakeholder concept for the internet. The other thing, when Sergio Mota was the Minister of Communications, Anatel started after the CGI, and he defined, after pressures from the academia, is that the internet is not a telecommunications system, but it's something that uses telecommunications. It's a value-added system. What the internet does is not subject to the usual regulations of telecommunications, because this is not telecommunications. Of course, depending on the country in the world, this might be different, but I'm very happy that we kept this original concept, separating them. Something that needs to be regulated. So we use satellites to share information, something that is each one's initiative. You create whatever you want, and it's important to preserve this idea.
So here we have a picture that's Leonard Cardin. And you can see this device that is quite odd. That's intermessage processor, IMP. At the time of ARPANET and Ethernet, We had the BitNet in Brazil. We had the HapNet. IBM had its own network. Digital had its own network. And they were naturally appropriate for their pieces of equipment. In Brazil, who had IBM, would just plug it and it would work. But when they did the ARPANET project, they had a quite different idea. And this led to a competitive advantage. That is, they said, I don't want you to connect your computer to the network. It will be quite confusing. I want you to create a device that is an interface between the computer and the internet. So that's the IMP, Interface Message Processor. You can see close to Klein Rock. So the network is built, so we have a mesh, many IMPs, amps, and the computer will communicate to this. So today you may have many at your house. That's the router. You do not switch on your computer or plug it in the internet. You do it through the router. And that's a quite different idea. So just to conclude these concepts, there are two quotes that are quite important. One by Jon Postel. You want it to work, you have to accept that you have rubbish, but you have to be liberal in what you accept and conservative in what you do. So for those who hold meetings, you know that's a fundamental. Another one by Dave Clark, that's for IETF. So that's a group that will generate norms and standards for the network. It is in Geneva. But IETF, they meet 3 times a year and they define the practices, the standards, etc. Dave Clark was the first chairman, and he said, we reject kings, presidents, and voting. So 10 to 9, we don't know if 9 who voted for 1 are wrong. He said, I will lose, I can gain something there, but what you said is acceptable. So we believe in rough consensus and running code. Barlow came to Rio and São Paulo twice, and that's a warning for regulation. The statements are in his book, The Economy of Mind. On internet, since it's a voluntary network, what will work should be globally agreed. So we should have internet in Brazil, not internet of Brazil. So he discusses regulations, but said that they tend to fail because the internet will not identify physical borders. Any policy will be successful only if it's harmonic and global. Moreover, he said, seldom there is a need to have a specific legislation for the network. So if there is a law stating that you should not convey virus, it will be obsolete. Well, I will skip this slide. CGI standpoint. So that's the basis for the civil framework. The problem was Danielle Sicaret. a famous model in Brazil. So she was in the beach in Spain. She did not behave properly with her boyfriend. And the court in the state of São Paulo established that they should block access to YouTube. But many people complain about the community. At that time, there was the internet community, and the community said there is no point saying no one can access YouTube because there was one guy that was kissing his girlfriend. So just one video that you don't like. And 6 days later, YouTube was released. But at CGI, we said we should orient on how they should act in each case. So we have 10 items. The concept, no one will go to prison. But some of them are quite sacred. Network neutrality. And the network should have criminal incapacity. So these are the principles that we used. So the network should be neutral, privacy of users, and unimputable network. So these are basic rights. And they have this crucial concept. You can create, and then you should arrange all the details. These are ecological slides. That's by Steve Crocker. So when you have regulation in the internet, we have to be careful on what we say. That's this sand clock we can see. You cannot just create a radio station or because you can interfere in airplane frequency, and you cannot just broke the sidewalk and install optic fiber for your house. And you have IP, Internet Protocol. And then after this bottleneck, we have what we call additional value. But what should you regulate? So when we look at this, IP, Internet, TCP, Internet. What about Netflix, YouTube? They are applications on the Internet. If you want to regulate them, you have this right. They may affect you or not. But here we have this line. We can regulate applications, the social media, but you have to be careful because sometimes you say internet, but people say, no, TCP should behave in such a way or a different way. But sometimes language will condemn us. Just more detail about it. There is one about NIC.br. It's a private organization, non-profit organization, and we carry out the statistics. We control traffic in São Paulo. So Brazilian internet is well acknowledged abroad. So internet is a mix of many networks. We rank second in Brazil in internet segments. The more fragmented the network, the safer it is. If we had just one network, we would lose a lot. Brazil was the vice leader, but we don't have an attack point to disrupt the network. IPv6, we are in this version number 6 now, and Brazil ranks among the top 10 countries. And just moving to AI, sorry. So we know when machines can do more than what humans do. We have to change terminology. But I won't call this AI because, you know, a hammer can place a nail on the wall much better than I, and that's a machine doing that. In the 1980s, we wanted to know what someone had written. We wanted to speak in a synthetic way. The Brazilian banks identified this 50 years ago. But we have to classify all these. Otherwise, we would just say it's all AI. And Nick is involved in what we call AI Observatory, and we want to gather data. We have experts in AI. Claudia Pianez, the next speaker, will address this. And we have data about this. So we are going to have this collaboration network. And I conclude, because I have quoted, and I didn't know the author, but the future of the internet is that it will disappear. Because, you know, what is very deep will disappear. It's part of your daily life. It's dwindled in your daily life. You cannot see it. So the idea is it will disappear and you use it in an indistinct way. Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Demi. Very good to have this overview about the internet. After the three lectures, I will ask you a question about AI. Now let's move on to the second speaker, Professor Cláudio. You have a presentation? Yes, I do.
Agradecer a presença de todos e todas que estão aqui, que estão.
Thank you so much. I would like to thank everyone, all our Brazilian and foreign speakers. I am from IBM Research. I work at IBM Research Lab. It's a global lab. We have one laboratory here in Brazil, and I also work in the C4AI, a partnership between the University of São Paulo, IBM, and FAPESP. And I'll try and talk to you about AI as someone who has been working in this area for 35 years. So I started working back in 1987. It seems to be very, very way back, but this is when the internet was starting. It was even before Brazil joined the net. But more than just telling the history, I would like to use this space for us to try and understand a little bit of what is happening with AI in this mess, and everyone is an expert in artificial intelligence. Everyone talks about it. It's everywhere and so on and so forth. So I would like to explain to you a little bit, set the context so that a little bit of patience so that we hold ourselves in when we talk about artificial intelligence today. So The theme is this: what is going on with AI? So this is not new. This is the fourth wave of excitement, of something crazy. And in order to do that, I'll do the following. I am going to use as a guide.
That's a material that I developed for Catavento Museum. So that was an exhibition to explain about AI for families and children. It's great. I do recommend you to visit it. It's a large museum. We have robots. But on the wall, they asked me, could you please place the history of AI on this wall? So I consider 10 moments that were very important. I believe that no one will argue about those 10 landmarks. Let's move on to the next slide. We are talking about 1950. Alan Turing, you may have watched the movie about him. And he was quite questioning about computers, and he thought, would those systems be intelligent? He did the Turing test, and that's a test that you hide the machine, and then you don't know if it's a machine or a person who is talking. And I consider this as the original scene of AI, because it's intelligent, because it can cheat us. Who am I to discuss with Turing? But there was something wrong, because we are talking about this again, about ethics, about the original scene.
And then in 1996, there was a meeting with many brilliant people. And in this space, John McCarthy, another one of the great names in artificial intelligence, created the term artificial intelligence. Everyone started using it. And even though it was created in 1956, no one could come up with something better. And no one really knows what this means. If you ask 10 different researchers about this, they will give 10 different definitions. So it's a computer trying to solve problems that people tries to solve, such as language problems, images, specific knowledge. And this is a definition. I don't think it's better. And everyone was there. And the main landmark and the first computer doing something interesting is ELIZA, a computer from 1965. It was the first chatbot. And it's a chatbot. So there is something going on. If you say, I am thinking about my wife today. Why are you thinking about your wife? Well, because I'm thinking in the present. So you take a piece and look forward. And people say, wow, without getting emotionally involved. This was something that you really observed, people interacting with machines. And this demonstrated, and it might not be so far away, and it didn't sound as something impossible. And then are the heroes from the 1980s, the researchers that invented expert systems in 1988. The world was going to be dominated by machines or ruled by machines. We needed to do national protection for artificial intelligence. The world will end because machines will rule over and will have command of technology. All of this that you're hearing today, we were talking back in the 1980s. So it were 3 times in 3 different cases, all over the world, probably. So at the same time, the neural networks, which are the stars today, but these 2 things didn't have much of an application because there was not enough information in neural networks. There was not enough machines. One didn't have enough data, and the other one didn't have enough machines. And then Rob Rue, someone very interesting, he was on my PhD assessors, and he thought about the first robots that could do something. So some people here have a vacuum cleaner robot. Well, if you have, you should thank him. And he said, well, to clean your home, you don't need to understand the world. A robot doesn't need to know that there is a wall or something. It needs to be persistent, not to stop there. And it's a philosophy of lowering computing power to the minimum necessary, and this enabled entire robotics. Everything is based on this vision. So if you have cars that drive themselves, this is because of him. He had a deep effect in robotics, but then they thought that it was good for everything, and it is not. So the idea in the 1990s, the 1990s were a very interesting decade. And this is what IBM do in 1999. Let's beat the world chess champion. How are we going to do that? It's force. There's a special machine, a special chip just for computing. All of that, we trained it. There was a special software just for the game. And then it challenged Kasparov, very, very complex person. So he was the pop star back at that time. He was a chess champion, and IBM won after 6 months in the last game in a brilliant way. I know the people who did that, and I know people who, some people who were involved in that. He was very, very angry. He had never imagined that he could lose to a machine. And he still thinks that there was some cheating involved, that there was some chess master teaching the machine. It was really a fate. It was just force. And at the same time that there was machine learning, I can teach a machine, not by programming, but through examples, just as Michael Jordan, not the basketball Michael Jordan, it's Michael I. Jordan, a mathematician. And then he proposed the graphical models. So with theoretical advancements in terms of machine learning, so no machine can do that. And the IBM machine was not done for that, to beat a chess champion. At the same time, we had the internet. What does the internet provide to AI? A large volume of data, which is essential for machine learning. And then the age, the amazing age of the last 10 years starts, well, 10 years more or less. It starts with something that IBM did. Because a project that had been going on since 2005, it decided to challenge the world champions of Jeopardy. Jeopardy was a questions and answers game, probably, or a contest show. If you've ever watched Jeopardy, if you know one answer, you feel very smart. It's different from the game shows that we have in Brazil. When you always know an answer. This is for very nerdy nerds. It's things that you never thought was possible. And more than anything, the problem with Jeopardy is that you have 1.5 seconds to answer. So you're human, you press a button and you answer it. So you need to decide where you know that in 19 seconds and you need to answer in 120 seconds. You don't even have time to think. If you Google it, well, too long. So just out of curiosity, if you know, the role of this game show is that IBM computer needed to physically press the button. Physically press the button with 0.2 seconds. Then we call the super engineer to reduce that to half. And then we want to allow the 10% of search time to find the answer. And then IBM won. And basically, we showed it is possible to seek texts. And it was done with a technology that was obsolete back then. And we used it, and we won using technology, a model that was obsolete, that was being overtaken by neural networks and deep learning, and everything that we are seeing today is a result from deep learning to a higher or lesser degree. So the Alpha book was... and then the computer beat another game that was impossible, and they found a way to do that. As the other two, the IBM. But games, we need to be careful. Games are made to be difficult for the human brain. But a game is interesting when it goes against the limits of our cognitive capacity. So we need to be careful with games. And we are not smart when we play games. We are not intelligent. But, so where are we today to try and close? So on this slide,
so we were no longer in the neural networks. Then we had the transformer. And then we got to ChatGPT and image generators. If I had to do it today, I would include 2 more landmarks. 2017 transformers, a really innovative architecture. No one knows what is the mathematical model, how it works, but it works. We know. And language models were created on this architecture. And yes, last year, OpenAI launched this. Let's play. So what is our opinion? You know, ups and downs. We are again on the top. We are going to solve everything. We will do the same with Watson. Always a special system, we would solve everything. But actually, we won't. We can see the history. We find a fantastic tool, and then some do not work because we lack data, or the software is not accurate enough, or has no computer power in order to run. So that's the moment of AI. We have to look the universe of applications. People are good doing this, and try to identify which technology can satisfy, considering data limitation, the need for accuracy and computational power. And machine learning, that includes all those systems, when we start learning with a machine, we have data, but we don't know if data will give you accuracy. Machine learning, all of them will fail eventually because you don't have data, we don't know the accuracy that you need. They say, well, that's 95% accurate. It won't work. 1 out of 10. So any more concrete case, people will give up after trying 30 times. But if you look, let's show an example. Suitcases, luggage in an airplane. How accurate is it? 99.99% to get your luggage. But if you do AI, it's very difficult to do it. So that's how it works. Do I have enough data? I don't know. Let's try. Is it accurate enough? I don't know. Let's try. What about the cost? Can I do this? And I will conclude. And that's an image from last week. Time published the most influential 100 people in AI. I thought AI was related to diversity problem. They would say, oh, we need Black people, we need women. AI today comes from the Eastern world, male and young people. 3 weeks ago, we had the largest AI conference. 70% of the audience were young people, male, and Oriental people. So I'd like to conclude now. Thank you.
Bom, voltamos aqui. Essa última observação.
So the last comment about timer curve, you are right. And if I look different ways, 100 people who are included there. We have crucial people in AI development, but some of them are just in the periphery, but we're included there. Thank you for your great lecture. I have a question for you.
Professor Somo, welcome. Now is your time. You have 15 minutes. Please.
You have 15 minutes, Professor. You have the floor.
Professor Somo? Yes.
Okay.
Do you have, yes?
Okay. Thank you so much for having me here. I agree with much of everything that was said, and I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, and I'll tell you why. But before that, let me talk about kind of the two phases of the internet and AI. We'll talk about the past and the future. So in the mid-'80s, there's a science fiction author, Gordon Dixon, who speculated on this idea of what we call the final encyclopedia. It was a satellite that orbits the Earth, and it's a repository for human information, right? Now, what I've learned is that there's no such thing as science fiction. Everything is speculative fiction with some science-y padding on it. And more often than not, that fiction is really right around the corner, right? So that's in the mid-'80s. Less than 2 decades later, we have Wikipedia. Now, Wikipedia doesn't sit in the cloud per se. I mean, if you ask most people what the cloud is, they won't be able to tell you what that is. But let's go back and take a look at how we got to this point. So I'm going to rewind way back to the 1800s, right? And if we talk about the Dewey Decimal System, so I'm not sure if it's used that much in Brazil, but certainly here in Canada, before the Library of Congress system, this is the first system that we used here. And this was a system used to curate information. Now, of course, if we jump forward a century, we have the military ARPANET, but nobody could use it. You and I did not have access to it. So the Dewey Decimal System gave us an idea of the democratization of information dissemination, whereas ARPANET is kind of on the exact opposite side of the spectrum. During the 80s, we had a bunch of text-based navigation engines. So we had things like the Bulletin Board System, or BBS. We had Lynx browser, Telnet, but they all required a little bit of technical knowledge. Not a lot, mind you, but a little bit. And during the mid-'80s in Toronto, maybe in Brazil as well, but certainly other cities around the world, we had dissemination of information. So it's important to highlight the term democratic, right? So what we should be asking ourselves now is information democratic, right? And I really don't know. I don't have an answer to that question. Is a Google search democratic? My guess is I doubt it, right? Should knowledge even be democratic? And I don't have an answer for that either, right? But what I do know now is that we have this giant, vast repository of information we call the internet, right? So it's a large source of data that was touched upon earlier. but the quality of that data is dubious. It's freely available, yes, and it's used to train AI in areas like NLP, computer vision, etc. But what every good data scientist knows is that we need to be worried about bias, right? We need to be worried about creating echo chambers, and we need to have policy that matches the speed of growth, right? Otherwise, we end up with one outpacing the other, and we have a false confidence in the policies that we're making, right? So that's the current state, right? Now, if we turn to the future, I shy away from being an alarmist, right? A lot of us, we hear about it in the news. There's always some article. And while it's true that we're outpacing policy in terms of data growth and usage, what began initially as a communications and information dissemination platform is now large-scale commercialization with advertising, as well as weaponizable communications, which we've seen in the U.S. elections and even long before that. It seems like Google is involved in a new lawsuit every other week. In fact, I think there was one announced this week. But it is also true that as human beings, we're very adaptable. So this last semester and the one before that, ChatGPT caused a huge panic here, and I'm sure there as well. But now we have tools to deal with it. We're learning how to deal with it. And as educators, we're also learning how to leverage it for ourselves, right? So what the future needs is more of this. We need to engage more of the right stakeholders. That includes academic institutions, governments should be a part of that conversation, industry. But the main thing is we shouldn't forget the end user. And part of that involves those who are marginalized, right? And that's a difficult thing to do. So what happens if you have a flip phone? Do you have the same access to the internet that I do, right? And it's the same with using AWS. I have all this great data available on the internet, but I can't crunch that data unless I have access to AWS or some large-scale computing platform. And that costs money. So not everyone can do that. So what are the future directions? Well, the future is already here, right? So we're talking about preventing and predicting outbreaks. We're talking about mass scale health issues. And we're talking about micro personalization of health outcomes, right? So personalized medicine using AI, right? Autonomous vehicles, those things, tailored educations, and the list goes on and on. It's there in the slides. So what I'm hopeful for, though, is that AI will be used to address problems like climate change mitigation, avoiding war, improving access to potable water and things like that. But there are some challenges towards this, right? So commoditization and self-commercialization is a problem because now that people are aware that data has value, they're guarding it, right? So this doesn't help us democratize information dissemination. Legal frameworks are moving very quickly, but technology, there's a disconnect in the speed with which these are happening, right? So if I want to share a news article on Facebook right now in Canada, I can't do that. I don't have any agency to do that. I spoke of weaponization earlier, right? And it's a matter of time before any data is used surreptitiously, right? So fake news is one thing, but what happens when you can't tell the difference, right? We've already faced this recently. Content echo chambers are a problem. So TikTok rewards users and they surface up higher in the rankings based on how they're doing, right? And all I'm doing is I'm creating an echo chamber. So there's a constant battle between the capacity of dealing with this available volume and the access of technology. And somewhere, someone is missing out, right? But there's an entire side, a different side of it as well. So I had the chance to meet Gary Kasparov this last year, and thank you for bringing him up. When I watched him play, I saw him, he's half machine and half human. I could see him think, right? So when I'm looking at his face and his head, I can see he's thinking, right? And I don't think it was dramatics. When I run Python code, I can't see anything. I just hit run and then something comes out a few minutes later. So I don't think at this point there's any I in AI, right? It's just ones and zeros. But when I saw the human being play, I saw some magic. And while it's true that transformers, for instance, are largely black boxes, if I run them over and over, I should expect kind of a similar result. So what I think we need to do now is think about things philosophically or ontologically, and think about the types of questions that we have going forward. Is AI black box magic, right? What are the rules and relationships that define Kasparov versus Deep Blue or AlphaZero, right? So when he was it's not just a pie in the sky question. When he was asked, how would you deal with AlphaZero? He had an approach. He used an approach and he identified a vulnerability. And this is the exact same thing a machine would do as well. So both entities have the exact same goal, right? Or maybe they don't. Does an AI have a self-directed goal? As far as I know, not yet, right? So that's an important question to ask. So if we go back over the last few millennia, there's always been a distrust of technology, right? There's many people before us. And I think we are having an explosive growth of AI. I don't think it's coming anytime soon, this idea of a singularity or anything like that. But we also do know that jobs are changing, right? Machines make mistakes. So there's a reality we have to deal with. So I think we're doing the right thing here. And I'll leave you on the note that this is the work of philosophers and data scientists working side by side. And what we should do is look to crowdsource solutions. So let's make data available, let's make processing fast, and let's make it accessible. I think that's all I have to say. Thank you. Hello?
Retomamos aqui. Pessoal, o auditório não está aparecendo agora. A imagem do auditório. Vocês estão me ouvindo, vendo? Oi?
Dora, I can hear you and I can see you, but I can't see the auditorium either.
Yeah, yes, that's a mistake. Quem falou? Foi a Alceli? Foi a Alceli que falou? Ah, tá. Não, tá certo. Não, eu entendi, obrigada. Mas o auditório, será que caiu? Peraí, eu tenho que ligar para saber o que aconteceu.
Professora Dora, você me ouve?
Oi.
É Karen.
Ah, tá. A gente
Nós não
estamos
ouve
vendo
bem, mas como o nosso Zoom aqui ele teve uma queda, a gente vai voltar em breve a aparecer, mas o áudio aqui nós estamos te ouvindo muito bem.
Nós podemos continuar?
Podemos sim. Já a gente entra aí na tela.
Tá, então, bom, muito obrigada, professor Sumo, e eu tenho 3 perguntas, né? O tempo é bem limitado, então eu tenho uma pergunta para cada um de vocês. O professor Demi, eu queria um pouco que você nos falasse, assim, desculpa o tempo que é bem rápido, é bem curto, mas na sua opinião, o que a inteligência artificial transformou ou está transformando a internet? Porque, sem dúvida, tem uma mudança no fluxo da informação, né? Na maneira como a informação flui na internet, na web. Então, eu queria um pouco que você pudesse nos falar um pouquinho sobre isso, na sua opinião.
Bom, na minha opinião, artificial evoluir, especificamente nas áreas de aprendizagem, né? Existem algoritmos fixos que não dependem disso, e existem algoritmos que são adaptativos e dependem da aprendizagem. Então, eu acho que existe aí uma simbiose em que uma coisa ajuda a outra. Isso já aconteceu com software aberto e internet, já aconteceu com uma opção de coisas de internet, e há certamente algo transversal em todas as áreas, mas ela conta muito com o apoio da internet para poder alimentar os seus fornos, né, o seu gestor de dados para poder gerar.
And to feed into its data digestion system. Thank you so much. Now I have a question to Claudio. Claudio, well, for sure and undoubtedly, anyone who has some familiarity with artificial intelligence understands deep learning and neural networks for the advancement of artificial intelligence. But everything that is going on today in economy, in society, is related to this technique. And as you say in your comment, this technique has countless limitations. So you follow up quite closely, especially working in an IBM research department, but in your interaction with research centers and other conferences that you participate. Do you see any investment being made or any effort to create alternatives for different techniques? What would that be? Because part of the advancement is based very much on entering more and more data. Well, in short, we have many limitations. Are you monitoring? Do you have any hope that shortly there will be a different alternative technique for deep neural networks that could, if not solve, at least address some of the limitations? Well, that's a complicated question. What we were seeing about 3 years ago was really the difficulty for the application of deep learning in the day-to-day of companies to address specific problems, because it was difficult to acquire data that were noted and everything. And then they were talking about more symbolic programs, causality. All of this was run over by the main language models, transformers and fusion, that showed the old history of AI. So you put more machines, more data, and then you move forward. I think this has been a constant for AI. And then you get to the limit of existing data, and then you can't do anything else going through that way, and then you start working in different areas. Then we don't see very much, so we work with research in traditional areas, but considering the volume of funds and people, and everyone is working in this area, it will take a while for us to see alternatives emerging. We are close, but we haven't yet exhausted what existing machines can do. I think there is still some room for a few years. And then there is a time, as we saw in the past, we get to a limit. What works within those limits goes into the day-to-day of companies. We will no longer call that artificial intelligence. It will become something else. And then we'll start trying to find other alternatives to fill that space. This is the usual cycle in this area. And for this reason, we should be careful with all the hype and everything. Take it easy. Let's stop and see what it's good for. And let's be careful where we are going to put the new technologies that we don't really know how they work. Now, in the case of transformers, the whole theoretical understanding is about 5-10 years ago. we have started now to understand how deep learning works. A few papers have been published in the last 2 years. They're really great, fantastic. And one of the problems is that we are lagging behind with theory. If the theory doesn't advance, we don't know much and we cannot see the future. So this is a wave. Let's look at the wave. Let's surf the wave and see what's left from this wave, as we did in other waves in the past. Thank you so much. I would have many comments to make, but we don't have time. Some other time, we can continue our conversation. Professor Schumo.
Hi.
To me, from your entire presentation, and also from what I have been seeing from all your activities, if you could comment, there is a paradox between artificial intelligence and environmental sustainability issues. On one hand, artificial intelligence has enabled us to have more knowledge as humans of climate change because of the capacity AI has to deal with large volumes of data and to expand and perfect and improve, and made it possible for us to have access to the knowledge that we have today. On the other hand, and this is a paradox, in doing so, because we have increasingly larger volumes of data with intensive energy consumption generating more CO2, it's essential that in being aware of climate change, it should have a negative impact on the environment. So this is a paradox that I would like you to comment on.
Thank
the
you.
Model.
Great question. I think absolutely we need to consider the cost-benefit ratio, right? Sure, there is that cost. It will always exist. 20 years ago, when I was doing climate modeling, I was, using pen and paper and little programs to crunch and do optimization, and that had a cost to it as well, right? We didn't measure it, but it definitely had a cost. I used computing power as well, and that could take days to run certain models. So there was a cost to it. That same work that I was doing then can now be done very, very quickly. And I'm talking about seconds here, not even minutes, right? So I can now leverage more for less, which will give us a savings. But even beyond that, even beyond the calculational side of it, there is the benefit that this new modeling will have that we could not have done before. And my hope and belief is that this will far outweigh the cost. So yeah, there's a paradox. And like we're talking about, you have a cell phone, you have apps on it. After a while, your phone doesn't work. You have to get the newest phone. And now everything works for a time, but then the apps get better. And again, your phone does the exact same thing over and over again. We will always have this tension. I think, like my colleagues just said, we're in a good place right now, where we have this much computing power. We have a little bit of runway to do a lot with that. So I think right now we're in a great place, and I'm not too worried about that paradox. I hope that answers your question.
Muito obrigada.
Thank you so much. I think that we need to wrap up. I would like to thank Solange very much for her participation and for the kind comments that she made in introducing me. Thank you so much, Solange. And I would like to thank the organizers, Karen. You're always organizing. Without her, anything would have been possible. I would like to thank very much the speakers. And these are all very complex themes, and they would demand us hours and hours talking about it. But it's like an introduction for us to think about and reflect about those themes. At other times, we can go deeper in our conversation. Thank you all so very much.
como você deseja fazer?
And Karen, how do you want to wrap up? Or Solange, who's going to close? Okay, let's finalize. I would like to invite everyone watching us to join us in the next panel that will be at 2 p.m. Brazil time. And I would like to thank you all very much and to wish you a good afternoon. Thank you.
Boa tarde a todos.
Good afternoon to everyone.
Tá bom.